Welcome to this session of Build on Demand. I'm Derek Jaeger, and I'm joined by my colleague Anton Fritz. Today, we'll be sharing with you our plans for enhanced admin setting granularity, management APIs, and Microsoft information and DLP policies in Power BI. Let's begin with planned enhancements to the granularity of settings. We have consistent feedback from our service admins saying that there is simply too many tenant settings for them to keep track of, and that the granularity they need isn't there. That setting management is an all-or-nothing scenario that doesn't account for different needs at the capacity or workspace levels. To address this, rather than simply toggling between on and off states with some filtration, as we allow for today, we're going to enable tenant admins to delegate some settings to both the workspace and capacity levels. And in turn, we're going to enable capacity admins to choose to delegate certain settings to the workspace level. So how will all this work? We plan to surface a subset of the current tenant settings, the capacity and/or workspace levels, under new configuration tabs in these views. Let's take a look at what this would look like. We have some UX mockups that will walk us through the flow for the tenant, capacity, and workspace admins. Here we have the current tenant settings view in the admin portal. You see the familiar on-off toggles with the ability to do some limited filtration or add things like custom messages. What we're talking about introducing is a refined level of control that will enable tenant admins to delegate some of these settings to the capacity and/or workspace levels. What we're looking at now is an example of 3 different settings that we're going to follow through from the tenant level to the capacity level and to the workspace level to show how this delegation would work. You'll notice the first setting has been disabled by the tenant admin. Now, the second setting has been enabled, but following it further down, you see that the tenant admin has enabled capacity admins to override it. Tenant admin also has an option to allow workspace admins to override it, but they have left this option unchecked. Moving on to the third setting in the third red box, the tenant admin has enabled the setting and has ticked both boxes down below, enabling both capacity admins and workspace admins to override it. Now we're looking at the capacity admins view of these exact same settings. The first setting, you'll recall, was disabled by the tenant admin, and there was no delegation applied to it. So the capacity admin sees that it's disabled, but they can't interact with it. The second setting is the one that the tenant admin enabled and delegated to the capacity admin, but did not delegate to the workspace admin. Here you see that the capacity admin can disable this enabled setting for their capacity, but they can't delegate it to the workspace admin. In other words, they can't leave it in the enabled state and then allow workspace admins to choose to override it for their workspace or not. That option has been disabled because the tenant admin did not check the box. In the third example, the tenant admin has delegated it to the capacity admin and has also enabled the capacity admin to delegate it to the workspace admin. So here you see the capacity admin can choose to turn this setting on or off for their capacity, or they can choose to allow workspace admins to override it. Now let's take a look at what this looks like from the workspace admin's point of view. Here you see the first 2 settings. Obviously, the workspace admin has no ability to interact with them, but they can see what state they're in. The third setting, the one that the tenant admin delegated to capacity admins and enabled the capacity admin to delegate to workspace admins, this is the one that the workspace admin can now interact with. They see that it's enabled. They can choose to disable it for their workspace if they wish to. So in conclusion, we plan to surface a subset of the current tenant admin settings at both the capacity and workspace levels. But tenant admins will continue to exercise ultimate control over whether and how these settings are delegated. Now let's go over what we have planned on the API front. We already provide a number of APIs to help support admins in their roles. Here are a few examples. We have APIs to help you discover workspaces and artifacts, like the Get Groups as Admin API, which lets you inspect all the workspaces in your tenant. There are also APIs to help you enforce governance, such as our Access Inventory APIs, aka who has access to what, which provide information about who has access to what Power BI artifacts in your entire tenant. There are also APIs to help you identify and use artifacts to help you reduce capacity usage. We also have scanner APIs. In the past, to get a full scan of Power BI assets, data source metadata, and lineage, you had to call multiple APIs. Now we've released unified async APIs that can get you all the required metadata and lineage information efficiently and reliably. This reduces the time that it takes for a full scan of a typical enterprise tenant down to minutes or hours instead of days or weeks. And we've also significantly reduced failure rate. We additionally provide an API to extract audit events directly from the Power BI activity log. You can call these APIs as a service principal, so you don't have to worry about losing access to non-admin user accounts. We also package these APIs up in a PowerShell library if you prefer to consume them that way. And we have plans to release more APIs to address some of your more pressing problems over the next 12 months. These include APIs that enable you to uncover widely shared artifacts, revoke or grant bulk permissions, delete artifacts, read or edit tenant settings, and get dataset refresh history. That concludes this part of the session. Thanks for joining me today. Now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Anton, who's going to speak to you about Microsoft information and DLP policies in Power BI. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. In the remainder of the session, I will share with you recent enhancements we have with information protection and data loss prevention for Power BI. These capabilities will help you improve your governance and data protection of sensitive data in Power BI and also reduce the risk of compliance violation and sensitive data leakage. So, first of all, I want to start with calling out Microsoft Purview. Microsoft Purview was recently announced by Microsoft, which is a unified suite of compliance and governance solutions that enable you to understand and govern your sensitive data, safeguard this data wherever it is, and also improve risk and compliance posture. Microsoft Purview Suite is combined with two big products that Microsoft has in this area. First of all, was previously called Azure Purview. Now it's Microsoft Purview Governance Portal. And the second one is Microsoft Purview Compliance Portal that includes capabilities like information protection, data loss prevention, and auditing. Many of these capabilities are already available for Power BI. I encourage you to check it out after the session. What are the Microsoft Purview capabilities that you can leverage for Power BI? In this session, I will focus only on recent enhancements. So let's start with recent enhancements for Microsoft Purview Information Protection for Power BI. For those of you who are not familiar, Microsoft Purview Information Protection is a solution that enables organizations to classify sensitive information and apply sensitivity label, whether it's manually or automatically. It's very popular for workloads like Office, OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, SQL, and others, and now Power BI, and it can be extendable for third-party applications. All of information protection management done in Microsoft Purview compliance under information protection section. So many organizations today already leverage information protection sensitivity labels in Office. So if you want to see if your organization already has this capability, open any Excel or PowerPoint file and see if you find the sensitivity label icon like you can see in the screenshot that enables users to apply sensitivity label on the file. And also it's enabled protection for Office files. So when you apply specific sensitivity label on a file, security admin can define who can access files with this sensitivity label, and it's automatically enforced. Information protection for Power BI and bringing these capabilities into Power BI built in, so it's natively integrated into the product. It's enabling unified sensitivity label scheme across different products, so it's easier to define and easier to deploy for end users. We support end-to-end protection, so once the sensitivity label is applied, we know how to apply it on files that are exported from Power BI. And also, we know how to read data source sensitivity label when we fetch data from sources that support sensitivity labels. And in the end, it's also reduce the governance complexity and cost for the central teams, because they can leverage the products that they already use for information protection of existing workloads, and for end users, because it's easier for them to onboard using this product in Power BI because they're already familiar with how to use it in other products. This is how it looks in Power BI service. You can go to any set of supported artifacts, including datasets, reports, and including data marts that were just released, and in Power BI desktop for Power BI files, and apply the right sensitivity label on the content that you own. This provides an ability to classify the content also for people who consume the data. So they will see the sensitivity level when they open Power BI reports. And also the data is protected when it's exported outside of Power BI to files automatically without any user intervention. Power BI knows how to apply the sensitivity label and protection settings on supported files, including Excel, PowerPoint, PDF, and PBX. A lot of enhancements were done in recent months in extending the data sources that support sensitivity labeling. Since recently, you can use SQL Server Management Studio to apply sensitivity labels on your on-prem SQL DBs, one of the most popular and common data source for enterprises, and on Azure SQL databases and Azure Synapse Analytics using the data discovery and classification in Azure portal. I will show you in a demo briefly. Also, the sensitivity labels that are applied on Excel files for organizations that already use sensitivity labels also automatically inherited when data fetched from Excel file to Power BI. Let's see the demo in action. So this demo starts from SQL Server Management Studio, and I will show you how you can apply sensitivity labels on sensitive data in your on-prem SQL. Using a data classification tool, you can choose what sensitivity level to apply on which columns. So sensitive columns that contain sensitive data can be applied with the appropriate sensitivity labels. Once the sensitivity label is applied on the column, this data is stored in the server's metadata, enabling Power BI to fetch it when this data coming into Power BI. In the next view, what we will see now is Power BI, where I can see the data lineage. So I have a data set, fetching data from the SQLs that we just saw, and fetching data from the columns that we applied sensitivity labels on. Upon refresh, Power BI identifies the sensitivity label on the source and automatically applies it on the dataset and on the downstream reports and dashboard. Once the sensitivity label is applied, now everybody who consumes this data in Power BI can see the sensitivity of the data. This is helping you meet a lot of regulatory and compliance requirements. All of the activities are also audited. So when the sensitivity label is applied, it's audited, so you can also monitor it. And when the user exports data from Power BI to Excel file, the sensitivity labels that was applied on the report automatically applied on the file. So users consuming the file outside of Power BI can see the sensitivity level, and if there are any protection settings, they're also automatically applied on the file. So only authorized users can access this data. And this is really game-changing capability. There is no other BI product or data product that can provide such end-to-end protection from data source through Power BI and outside when you export data. Similar to the demos that I showed you in SQL Server Management Studio, you can apply MIP sensitivity label on Azure Synapse Analytics and Azure SQL database using the Azure Discovery and Data Classification service. So you go to your SQL database or you go to your Synapse Analytics, and then you can identify this classification tool and in similar pattern apply the sensitivity labels on the columns. The application of the columns happening once, and then every time that Power BI fetches data from these columns, the sensitivity label will be applied on data in Power BI. So now we know how to inherit sensitivity label from source. We also provide the admins with the ability to configure in a compliance center default and mandatory label policies for Power BI. This helps organization to ensure that new content that is being created is applied with sensitivity label, and therefore you maintain compliance and regulations. So in the portal, in the label policy settings, you can define what is the default label policies that will be assigned to Power BI content when user creates one. And also you can define mandatory label policy, which will require users to apply a sensitivity label every time they create new content. They can be enabled separately. So you can use only default or only mandatory label policy, and you can also enable them together. If you enable them together, you can enjoy the both worlds. So users are not prompted every time to apply sensitivity label. The content will be created with default label policy, and the mandatory label policy ensures that people do not remove a sensitivity label, because when mandatory label policy is enabled, user cannot remove sensitivity label. They can only change it to another one. So many of our enterprise customers already using Power BI for years and have tens and sometimes hundreds of thousands of artifacts in Power BI service today. So if you enable sensitivity labels now, to meet your regulatory requirements, you will probably need to apply sensitivity label on the existing content as well. For this purpose, we have released admin APIs that enable you to identify which artifacts, which datasets, report, etc., are not applied with sensitivity label, and set sensitivity label API to apply sensitivity labels programmatically on large number of artifacts. So here is a snippet from our documentation. You can look it up, and that shows the case like what you need to do. First of all, you need to provide a list of artifacts that you would like to apply sensitivity label on. Then fetch from compliance the label ID that you want to apply on these artifacts. And afterwards, you just create a method like in this documentation that runs the API one by one for each artifact and sets the sensitivity label. Using these APIs, you can reach full sensitivity labeling of your tenant in a very short time. Also, to support monitored sensitivity label activities, in addition to audit logs, which are audited every time that users apply sensitivity labels, we also provide Power BI admins with data protection metrics report, which gives them a snapshot of the status of sensitivity labeling of their tenant, so they can identify how much of the content is applied with which sensitivity label, and also identify the portion of the content that isn't applied with sensitivity label. And then trigger an action like use the API or enable one of the policies to ensure that content being labeled. To enable sensitivity labels in Power BI, you can go to Power BI admin portal and enable information protection. Just note that a prerequisite for enabling sensitivity labels in Power BI is for sensitivity labels to be defined in compliance portal. So if your organization already has sensitivity labels for Office, you're good. Then you just need to enable them in Power BI admin portal. And the setting here enables you to enable it for gradually, for a small number of users for testing and validation, and then enable it for entire tenant once you're ready to deploy. Once you enable this, it turns on automatically all the built-in experiences that I just showed. From licensing perspective, for sensitivity labels, users require to have information protection and governance license, which is very common in many of the existing Microsoft suites. Another very exciting capability. So up until now, there wasn't a way for administrators, security, and governance to automatically identify sensitive data in Power BI. This is now can happen with data loss prevention policies in Power BI. So data loss prevention policies, similar to information protection, is another solution available in Microsoft Purview Compliance Portal. It is already widely used for data loss prevention of workloads like Exchange, Office, Teams, and others. And in essence, it enables admin to automatically identify sensitive information and take automatic remediation step. So for Power BI DLP policies, which are in preview now, we support conditions that is sensitivity label. So the condition of the policy can be upload of data with specific sensitivity label to Power BI service. The second one, which we recently released, is the out-of-the-box sensitive info types and automatically identify sensitive data in the dataset by scanning. So I repeat it, we can now scan the content of the dataset and identify the sensitive info types present in this dataset. Microsoft offers over 200 out-of-the-box sensitive info types like social security number and credit cards that you can leverage for this. And for organizations that need to expand it for their custom scenarios, there is an option also to create custom sensitive info types and then incorporate them in DLP policies for Power BI. For actions, as for today, we support these three actions upon condition met. First of all, every time that DLP policy condition met, audit log is fired and audited into the audit logs. Second one, you can configure showing data owner a notification Power BI service with text that you provide for the actions that they need to take or the awareness that they should have because the dataset contains sensitive information. And the last one is automatic alerting. So if you have a DLP team or security team or governance teams that monitor such activities, they don't need to eyeball the audit logs or build custom solutions. They can just leverage the out-of-the-box alerting that DLP policies have. Let's see a demo for this. So in this demo, I will show you how a security or governance admin can define a data loss prevention policy in Microsoft Purview and see how it's working in Power BI and what is the end user experience in Power BI. And we'll finish the demo with alert, how alert is visible. So in Microsoft Purview, I go to data loss prevention section. I click on create new policy. As for today, we support custom policy for Power BI. And I want to detect credit cards. I assign the policy to Power BI. Currently, Power BI can be the only workload that you use. And then the next step is to create a rule. So this rule will use out-of-the-box sensitive info type, credit cards, which is already available by Microsoft. And upon condition met, I will define a policy type that the user will see. And also I define to trigger an alert for the security admin. DLP policies can be run in test mode, so it won't trigger user-facing action, or in production mode, which will trigger user-facing action. Now I'm in Power BI desktop as data owner. I upload to Power BI service a report that has a credit card number. Upon upload, Power BI scanned the content according to DLP policy condition and identified credit card in this dataset. And the end users can now see the custom policy type that the admin defined. Back in the compliance portal, in alert section, security admins can examine all the alerts that are triggered, and these alerts can be configured to be forwarded to email or other alerting services. To summarize the section, I covered only the recent enhancements that we have for information protection, data loss prevention, Power BI. Much more is available. Most of the capabilities are generally available. The newer ones are in public preview. recommend you to check them out. There are a lot of compliance regulatory requirements that can be met by leveraging Microsoft Purview for Power BI. On behalf of Derek and myself, I hope you found this session helpful. Please give us feedback. Thank you very much.